Well, hello, everybody. My name is Roger, and welcome to my channel, Rogers Reads. So today, I'm going to do a book review of a novel entitled Scythe, which I read a couple of weeks ago. I actually listened to it on audiobook, and it was really good on audiobook. I'm glad I listened to it that way. So the novel, it's written by Neal Shusterman. And this was the first novel of his that I've read, and I really enjoy it. So I'm pretty much hooked. I really love this book, and I love the world that Mr. Shusterman created in this book. So the novel takes place not in a dystopian society, but rather in a utopian society in the future, at a time where hunger, disease, crime, and even death no longer exist. So once people begin to age, they can go through this procedure called turning the corner, in which they can once again inhabit the body of a 21-year-old, or older if they so choose. I think that, if I remember correctly, they said in the book they're working on fixing it so that you could inhabit a body of a teenager if you wanted to, although they're still discussing the morality of that. So people who do end up getting inadvertently getting killed from accidents, for instance, are only considered deadish. And immediately after their demise, helicopters show up and then whisk them off to revival centers where they're restored to their former selves. Usually takes about 3 days or so. So thus, people in this new and improved society are more or less immortal. And there is one exception, that's fire. So if you die by fire, you're dead for good. Additionally, each person in the society has in their system what are called nanites, which control pain and help speed up the healing process. So people don't even experience pain to the extent that we feel pain. But humans still reproduce. And so that means there needs to be some sort of population control. And this is where the scythes come in. That population control falls under the jurisdiction of the scythedom, which is made up of individual scythes. Now, scythes are the only individuals in society that are allowed to take life. In fact, each scythe is charged with going out and killing a certain number of people each year. I think it was about 240. Now, when a scythe kills somebody, it's referred to as gleaning, and that person can no longer be revived. So once they are dead, once somebody is killed by a scythe, they are killed for good. So think of the scythes kind of as reapers. Actually, while I was reading this, it made me think of a television show that was on years ago about a group of reapers. I remember it revolved around a girl. Her name was George, I think, and she was killed actually she got hit on the head by a toilet seat. What was the name of it? Dead Like Me. It was Dead Like Me. So that was a fun show. Yeah, so it kind of made me think of this. Now, the thing about the scythes is that in the book is that they must be of the highest moral discipline and possess qualities such as empathy, humanness, and compassion. So as such, a scythe chooses their individual victims with careful consideration, allowing no bias, bigotry, or malice to enter into their choice of victims. And this is actually one of the scythe's 10 commandments. Now, speaking of apprentices, you can only become a scythe by going through intense study and training and then undergoing intense scrutiny by the scythedom. Oh, and one of the first rules of becoming a scythe is that the person must not want to become a scythe. I think that this would be a good rule for politicians as well. I've always said that only somebody who doesn't want to be president should be president. But I digress. So, back to the scythe. Of course, the ideal is not always the reality. The idea of that scythes must be of the highest moral compass. And somehow a few bad apples manage to squeeze through the scythedom cracks. And this is where things really get interesting. And we're introduced to these not-so-moral scythes pretty early on in the book. Now, these bad apples are scythes who take pleasure in killing and maybe even toy with their victims before bleeding them. Now, these Scythes may not have started out being heartless and cruel, but as Scythes are giving ultimate power over life and death, it's not surprising that there would be those who could be corrupted by that much power. Power does have a tendency to corrupt, as we've seen over and over again in our history books. Scythes are, in this society, placed above civilization and are even referred to as your honor by anybody who crosses their path. So it's not surprising that some would abuse this power, like many organizations or governments become corrupt with too much power. So in this novel, the story revolves around two main characters, Citra and Rowan, who are chosen by a particular well-respected Scythe, the Honorable Scythe Faraday, to be his apprentices. So what follows is the adventures that Rowan and Citra go through as they train to be effective killers, compete with each other, and struggle with romantic feelings that emerged as they got to know each other. Now, it's worth mentioning that romantic involvement with anyone is strictly forbidden between Scythes, among Scythes. Now, I will say that this is not a romance novel. Though romance may perhaps play a small part in some of the decisions of the characters, this is not what drove the plot of the story. Now, Rowan and Citra, I really enjoyed getting to know their characters as the story progressed. As the plot moved forward, you learn that these two are really quite complex, especially when faced with impossible choices. What I really liked about them is they were both strong, both as individuals and also as a team. Citra and Rowan, along with their Scythe teachers, attend these quarterly Scythe conclaves where we enter deeply into the realm of Scythe politics, which I found incredibly fascinating and eye-opening. Especially once we learned about the rampant corruption in the Scythedom. Now, it's also worth mentioning that there are no longer any governments in this society. All jurisdiction falls under what is called the Thunderhead, which is evolved from the internet's cloud as we know it now. So the Thunderhead is the ultimate jurisdiction and knows everything about everyone and intervenes when necessary. It's like, how do you describe it? Like the internet at some point evolved into a sentient being, which is kind of how I understood it. So as a society, nobody fears this Thunderhead. On the contrary, the Thunderhead is revered and honored almost like a god, because the Thunderhead does protect and provide for everyone. Now, the only exception to the Thunderhead intervening in the lives of others is when it comes to Scythe business. It was agreed long ago that the Thunderhead would have no jurisdiction at all once it came to Scythes, and it completely stays out of Scythe business, which I don't think is necessarily a good thing, as we see with the power-hungry and power-corrupted Scythes. One of the requirements of being a Scythe is keeping a journal, and each chapter in the book opens with a short excerpt from the journals of one of the Scythes in the story, such as Scythe Faraday or Scythe Curie, who is known as the Grande Dame of Death. So these journal snippets provide not only additional insight into Scythe politics, but also give essential information about the current society in which the story takes place. I especially enjoy the comparisons of the current society to the moral age, or the moral time before technological advances made it possible for people to potentially live forever. So just when I had pretty much figured out the premise of this book and had a general idea of the direction in which the story was going, the author threw a major wrench in the works that I did not see coming at all. So at this point, the entire plot of the story changes as it veers off into directions that I couldn't have anticipated. I loved the twists and turns and surprises that the author threw in, adding even more layers to this already fascinating story. And just when you think you got a handle on what's going on, then the author throws in another twist. So all in all, this was a compelling story with excellent world building that kept me guessing right until the end. And I love the ending, by the way. This is the kind of novel that gets you thinking, especially as it pertains to moral ambiguity, those gray areas of right and wrong, and what the decisions that we make say about the kind of person we are. It also demonstrated nicely, I think, how our environment can affect the kind of person we become. This was really nice, well illustrated in the differences of the morality of the Scythes in the story, depending on who trained them. As it turns out, this book, Scythe, is part of a duology called The Arc of a Scythe, but you'd never know it from reading this book, because the story is wrapped up very nicely at the conclusion of this book, and it felt finished and totally complete to me. Now, in my humble opinion, this is the perfect example of how books in a series should be. I loathe the cliffhangers, but that's another discussion for another time. But all in all, I love this story, and I can't wait to read the next book, which is called Thunderhead, I do believe, in this series. I also look forward to reading more of Mr. Shusterman's work, and I give this book 5 stars. And that's it for Scythe. If you read Scythe, let me know in the comments below what you thought of it, or whether you plan on reading it. And that's it. Thanks so much for watching. If you like this video, I appreciate it if you give it a thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more of my videos, hit the subscribe button. And I will talk to you next time. Bye-bye.